All righty, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and get started here in just a moment. Just about to copy the link onto the Patreon page. Welcome aboard, everyone. Welcome, welcome. We'll get started here in just a moment. Dude. Do we have the stream up here? Okay, looks like we do. All righty. Got the sound check earlier, so we should be all good to go here. And post it on the deal here. Boop. All right. Wait. No. Don't want that tomorrow. We want it right now. How about that? Now would be good. Publish now. Alrighty. Okay, a little behind the scenes action here as we get started. So, ladies and gentlemen, back here. This is the third episode of Brock Talks, getting started here on the channel. We're now in the closing days of the NASCAR off season. We've almost made it through, everyone. So we are clicking off the final few days, and as has been the story this week, unfortunately we're seeing the end of jski.com, and that was quite a bit a little bit surprising there. Of course, ESPN has been scaling back its coverage of NASCAR ever since they've really stopped doing the broadcast of the sport themselves. And then, of course, it's well publicized what they had done with Ricky Craven and Bob Pockrass, and eliminating them from their lineup as well as part of that scaling back. Perhaps it was perhaps inevitable that was going to happen, but it's truly the end of an era. I think a lot of us longtime fans have been kind of really coming to terms with the change in the sport, and the change in the landscape of the sport. But jski.com, I mean, they've been around for so long. Back in 1996, I was in the 8th grade back then. Being able to share different up-to-date news when you didn't really have social media. You didn't have Twitter, you didn't have Facebook, you didn't have any of that stuff, and you barely had an internet. Jski was the place that you would get all your silly season news. You would get your information about what team changes are happening, what new sponsors are coming into the sport. And especially this time of the year, I mean, it's brutally sad that their site would end right on the cusp of the Daytona 500, because then each year this would be the time that you would really go to that website and you would really have that information about the sport. Knowing who's going from which team and which driver to where. It used to be, the most of those driver and team changes would happen or would be formally announced mostly during the off season. Some would come up earlier in the year, but that was kind of the silly season, would always be like towards the end of the year into the off season and then going into the next year. Nowadays, silly season is a regular occurrence. You see, social media has made it such that you can find out what's happening with a team during a race or what's happening during a weekend. And the landscape has changed, and Jski had, in my mind, had been keeping up to date with that. I mean, they had their own Twitter account, their own social media, but it's unfortunate to see that that they're no longer going to be updating. I mean, one can argue that perhaps social media has really taken their place, but and I'm sure nothing lasts forever, but for an independent NASCAR news site, and as an independent NASCAR journalist, this is a site that I always looked up to and always consulted, and a lot of good memories looking through those team charts and looking through those paint scheme lists and just staying up to date with the sport. Filling in what the broadcasts weren't able to cover or weren't able to cover as in depth. Also providing as a hub, really, to provide articles and news stories from other journalists. I mean, it's a great one-stop shop. I mean, you just have that favorites tab, that link in your favorites tab, and just go to it each day and just find out what new is going on. And so that's really been, a big part of that. And you really want to have, have that out there so that you could actually cover, actually cover the sport. It's unfortunate to see that, to see that change and to lose that. And I'm hopeful that, to Jay Scott and Amanda, the staff there, that there is something that they can find in the sport, much like we have seen with Bob Cockris and with Ricky Craven. I mean, that was originally going to be kind of the big story I was going to talk about here, of course, was, seeing Bob, land at Fox Sports as well as Ricky Craven there. I mean, that's tremendous for the two of them, and it really goes to speak to, to the quality of what Fox has going forward. I mean, I've been critical about, it seems like in the past, Fox Sports has really kind of been stuck with their own format and unwilling to really change from their what they did back in 2001 when they jumped in and as broadcasting NASCAR races. But I mean, I guess if they're bringing new people in, and they're bringing in, well, maybe not new people, bringing in established faces that have long histories of the sport, like those two, it's only going to serve to benefit what they're doing. So kudos to Fox for bringing Bob on and bringing Craven on. But it's and who knows, maybe something happens with Jayski, and we just haven't heard about that yet. So fingers crossed on all of that. But the Jayski site coming up, that was always a website that, it can't be understated how helpful they've been for journalists of all kinds. And when you're working your way through the ranks, the most important thing that you can get, as well, really producing any kind of content on the internet, is getting eyes to see it, getting people to see it, getting it out there, and knowing that there's people that are interested in your stuff. And certainly for my website, I mean, that was absolutely paramount at Jayski. They were all the way through last season. They always shared my links whenever I sent them over to them. They put them up on this, on the same page, and it was cool to see my work, on there, and to see it on their article page along with the big names that are out there, like Bob and Jenna Fryer and Jeff Gluck and all those other ones, and knowing that people looking for those stories, they can look for my stories as well. And I know that that's a sentiment shared by plenty of other people in the media as well, and their information getting out there. So I mean, that's always really been the big part of that. So that's really the shame of it. I mean, hopefully things change, and we never know how this is all going to work out. But I'm just gonna check to make sure this link is the correct one on here. It just occurred to me. Okay. Yeah, okay, that's the same one. Good. Sorry about that. I was worried we weren't getting on the Patreon page. I want to make sure everybody can hop in if they want to. Okay. But again, it was really, I mean, it still came as a shock to me when Jayski said that they were closing the site, and it's unfortunate really for the, like a lot of these things, with the next generation of people that are going to be producing content, and the next people that are following the sport. Because again, as I said, getting eyes out there and having a central hub that everybody can look at and say, okay, look, here's this person's new content out there. And they also had a way to really feature, like, if your story, I mean, the challenge also was to try to get kind of into the elite group of links. Like, if something was kind of featured up there, like if you had like a story that was big enough that was like the big scoop, and that was really something you kind of shoot for too, and it made you kind of want to work that much harder. And then your article would get seen above even the other articles that were on there. Even on my beat, it's with what it is, and covering the last place finishers and everything, there were still some articles that we were able to get covered on there. Two that immediately come to mind would be Denny Hamlin's last place finish in Atlanta in 2010, where he was the first pole sitter to finish last in a Cup Series race since 2008. And back then, we're actually just starting to get the statistics back together and covering how often that had happened and how often that happened in history. And the other big thing with Jayski is that they had those statistic pages where you could see who had the most second place finishes before they won, who had the most starts without a win, things like things of that nature, and that those were updated every week. You see Racing References has really picked up on that, and perhaps that's another website that kind of took some of that traffic as well. Fantastic site that it is, of course, but back then when you just had Jayski, it's easy to it's kind of interesting to describe it in that way, because you think of it at a time where, yes, you had the internet, but it was still like TV in its infancy, when you only had a few different channels. You only had a few different places that you could get information. And Jayski was just that big location, and it was like a one-stop shop, which was great about it. You could go there if you wanted news, it was there. If you wanted paint scheme stuff, it was there. And if you wanted just team updates, it was there. And that was, that's something that's really going to be missed, I think. And I'm glad to see that there are sites like Racing Reference, and there is social media, and there are other people, other journalists out there that are providing that content and really taking what worked best from Jayski and keeping that going. And I'm hoping that that traffic is, they're gonna get that traffic, from the people that miss Jayski, and that's certainly hopeful. I know Aaron Bearden got mentioned specifically by Jeff Gluck. His newsletters were a way that you could get additional content, and kind of that silly season update thing from his newsletter. So, that's just one aspect of the website there, but that's fantastic that he's keeping that going. So, kudos to him, and kudos to others that are keeping that going. But again, I guess you could view social media as kind of a central hub to get that information. But again, if you're not following just the right channels, or you're not following just the right media personalities, you may not get all of those stories. And Jayski was kind of a way to kind of get all that together, and to have done it for so long, and really been, kind of a pioneer there. And I'm certainly another one of those people that, I miss the old website format, what they had until ESPN really took it over. It was, I mean, people can get as critical as they want about, web design and modern web design and what's, user friendly or anything. I mean, let's face it. If you just have if you're having a news site and you just have a page with a bunch of links, that's the best way to do it. You just had it as simple as possible. Then in the top right corner, you'd have, I guess the top, we're camera. Let's do top right of the camera here. You would have that information, and you could see like the countdown to when the green flag would be, not the start of the broadcast, the start of the actual race. Every bit of information you would need was right there at the top of the page. And that was the other thing too, the efficiency of it. You can do that on social media, you can do that on your own website, but to have that all like under one umbrella. I'm repeating myself a lot on that, but I mean, it must be said, we still live in an internet where Google is king and where YouTube is YouTube, and other people have tried to compete with those websites, and they just haven't reached that level. And I think it's no exaggeration to view Jayski in that same sense when it comes to NASCAR news, at least in terms of a directory, a net directory for all that information. We've seen message boards go by the wayside, and in lieu of Facebook groups, and then you have social media, and then different outlets for that, and all that changing. But perhaps, I mean, what I'm hopeful of is that perhaps this, there's the next step in the evolution for them, and they're going to find their place in what the new media landscape is, whether that's going to be maybe some live streaming or some YouTube, YouTube news kind of function, or some other thing that still keeps them in the circuit with NASCAR media and helps the next generation come along. I'm certainly hopeful that they do reach that point. So sorry to see him go. It's an unfortunate situation, and it draws draws a lot of questions about where we are heading, and it's silly season is just not going to be the same. I mean, they pretty much coined the term. I don't know. Well, maybe they didn't coin the term, but they popularized it certainly. With that page, and when they sponsored Billy Standridge, in 1997, they barely existed for a year when they did that. That's just unheard of these days. I mean, even with the smaller teams in the Cup Series, you got to really get a lot of income going to try to sponsor any of these teams or do any kind of backing at all like that. So, we'll see what happens going forward. But it's I still have the link in my bookmarks page here, and I'm going to have a hard time not clicking that each time, even if the information hasn't been updated exactly. So, we'll see what happens going forward. But the next thing I want to kind of talk about here on this is the closing of J-Ski has brought up a lot of debate about ESPN's role in the sport and them scaling back in the sport. And I touched on this already when I was talking about Bob Pockrass and Ricky Craven getting picked up by Fox, and also it addresses Fox in general. It pains me to think of ESPN as not being tied with NASCAR at all, or even really just being indifferent or just separating themselves from NASCAR completely. That, as a kid growing up and watching Bob Jenkins, Ned Jarrett, and Dr. Jerry Punch, and Benny Parsons and all those guys on TV. This was a time where ESPN these were the broadcasts that you look forward to, or at least that I look forward to, and I don't think I'm alone in that respect. The ESPN broadcasts were the gold standard, and I've said this to every person that's worked on the network during that time period, from the early '80s until 2000 in particular. And I mean it. I mean, these were the broadcasts you looked forward to, and you knew what you were expecting when that Speed World theme came up. I mean, you had great graphics, great music production, great video production. They had unique cameras. They had a group of personalities in there, like the names that I mentioned, that, as Bob Jenkins said during their last broadcast, was just magic. They had people that just played off each other, and it just worked perfectly. Each of them had a job that was equally important, and they all gave each other enough room, but they were professional, but they weren't so professional that it was stifling or anything. They somehow managed to ride that line between being very professional and very relaxed. And I think that's something that a lot of these other networks have attempted to achieve, and have just not accomplished in one way or the other. And this is something that even ESPN itself struggled with when they came back in 2007. But to think, obviously back then you had TBS and you had CBS and you had TNN, of course. And I'm thinking more like the time I got into the sport in the early '90s. You had all these different networks that were involved in getting the sport out there, and each of them had their own unique style. And they're again different personalities on each of them. Certainly TNN, Eli Gold. I still pronounce Joe Nemechek, just because that name just sticks in my mind. I think late '90s TNN broadcasts. I think, again, great music packages, great production like that. Buddy Baker in the booth, and of course that crosses over into the TBS broadcast as well. TBS as well as CBS, when you had Ken Squire in the booth. TBS, again, rockin' music theme that they had. I mean, I've used it in the old Starting Grid videos I've done before. Amazing production value. They did a good job. I like their Starting Grid format as well. TNN's for that matter. And then CBS, I mean, that's the granddaddy of the group there. I mean, the one that came in with the Daytona 500 in 1979, stayed with Daytona into 2000. Before the new contract deal came in. But again, and those were all good. They all had their special moments. But ESPN, that was really the perfect storm. And it's not saying that those other networks didn't do a good job. They did. They really did. I mean, but I always remembered getting that extra bit of excitement when I knew it was an ESPN covered race. And you would get that schedule at the beginning of the year when it was hopping around so much. I mean, these kids these days, they don't understand. You got Fox for the first part of the schedule, you got NBC for the second half of the schedule, and that's simple. I mean, okay, they jump around between NBCSN or NBC or something, but that it's basically going to be, it's either going to be the Waltrips on this part, or it's going to be Junior and Steve Letarte on this other part. It's going to be Mike Joy, or it's going to be Rick Allen. That's just the way that it works. But when you had the talent that they had, when you had the producers that they had, the directors, the people that just genuinely seemed to care about the sport and the way it was portrayed and the way it was presented, and the importance that they knew of when, that they were introducing you to who these drivers were, and people talk even about the rain delay coverage, as being, some of the best coverage that they had back then, with Dr. Jerry Punch and John Kernan and their other, and Bill Weber and the other pit reporters that they had back then. I For me personally, I've never been a big fan of the rain delay coverages. I mean, I'm very simplistic when it comes to watching races. I watch the race broadcast to watch the race. Particularly I'm not particularly that interested in like what these people are doing, like, when they're hanging out and waiting for the rain, to stop, because they're basically doing the same thing that I'm doing. I'm just sitting there waiting for it to just end, and they're even more anxious because they got a job to do and they got to go out there and race and everything. But even I'll admit, the way ESPN handled that was more interesting. They were, again, that's where they were professional, but again, that's where their ability to ride that line and be kind of relaxed enough that they could talk to these guys openly and talk, because they knew these people. And that was one thing that's been talked about in some of these interviews years later. They knew these people, they knew these drivers, they knew the names of their kids, they knew their families, they'd hung out with them, they'd done charity events together, and I guess that's still happening today. But it's when you had, I think it was just also just that time period. I mean, you would have Ned Jarrett and Benny Parsons over in the ESPN booth that had been veterans of two different decades. I mean, Ned Jarrett had been outstanding in the 60s, and Benny Parsons was really owned the first part of the 70s. And having both those personalities in there, I mean, they were out there seeing a lot of these drivers that were competing. They raced against them. They saw them growing up. And, we even nowadays, when you have Darrell Waltrip and you have Jeff Gordon and you have Dale Jr., it's a narrower period of time. I mean, it's close to that, but I mean, it's such a different time period. I mean, if we're talking about people that raced against people from, like, the 1990s, and that being viewed as a throwback now, I mean, that to see that, somebody was pointing this out on Twitter the other day. We got Truck Series competitors that were born in 2003. 2003 doesn't feel that long ago to me, but I mean, nowadays it is. I mean, that's really a whole different time. You look at some of these paint schemes from back then, and it's a whole different thing. And that's the experience that you have the modern driver commentators go back to, because that's when they were new. I mean, you had your Dale Jr. and Jeff Gordon and the other guys there, and that was either when they were at their peak, or in Junior's case, around the time that he was just starting in the Cup Series. But again, that goes back to that perfect storm thing, that you had these much older veterans in the sport. And my point in bringing all this up is that is what is really sad about seeing ESPN now actively distancing itself from NASCAR. It's the final step in what really began back in 2000, when they lost the contract to Fox and NBC, and you had the breakup of that group. I remember that race very clearly. I mean, that was back in 2000. Jerry Nadeau won his first race, which to me was tremendously exciting, because I was in his fan club at the time, and had followed him up, the ranks, and watching him in the ESPN broadcast, and as well as the others back then. That was a great moment there. And, Darrell Waltrip's last start. And of course, that's a transition into Fox's start with the broadcast in 2001. But you could tell how much they cared. You could tell how much the group of them cared. And that, and then one right after another, they were just leaving. And Benny Bob Jenkins, having the unenviable task of having to close out the broadcast, and, trying to get that out. But then right after another, like right after the checkered flag, they're still doing victory laps out there. And then, Benny Parsons says, well, this can be the last broadcast I do. And then Ned Jarrett says, yeah, this one's the last one I'm doing too. And suddenly they're just all gone. Like, they're, not gone, but I mean, they're gone from the broadcasts. And that was tremendously. I mean, even if it was pretty clear that they weren't going to get picked up by Fox or anything like that, and they were going with a different angle, I mean, that was, you can't overstate that. I mean, these guys have been in it, for 2 whole decades, and that's all they did. And that was, it really set in at that point. And right to the end, they were very professional in handling that. I don't know how they accomplished that, but that's the thing. And that's the memory I go back to when I hear about ESPN, now distancing themselves from from Jayski, from Bob Pockrass, and from Ricky Craven. These were people that were like the last hangers on that were still right to the end, just like the group back in 2000, doing their absolute most to represent the sport as best they could, and doing the same work that they had always been doing. There's no drop in quality or anything like that. And then we're just unceremoniously just let go. And it's you hate to see that. You hate to experience that. And you could pass it off as just a difference in the times, but it's still it still hurts. But you know the trend with ESPN has always been weird, because when they came back in 2007, it just wasn't the same, and perhaps it couldn't have been. I think maybe it would be good to just be a little bit more fair to them and say, well, look, I mean, if they weren't going to have Ned Jarrett and they weren't going to have Benny Parsons, of course, Parsons had passed away in over that offseason before, after coming back to work with NBC for a little while. And Bob Jenkins was just doing IndyCar and stuff by that point. They did the best they could. They brought in Dr. Jerry Punch, who had been, on top of being an outstanding pit reporter, both he and John Kernan, he had also been a good play-by-play guy. And I mean, he called Dale Earnhardt's last win back in 2000 when Bob Jenkins wasn't there, and did an amazing job. His call of that finish, of him saying Mr. Restrictor Plate coming down, through the tri-oval there the last time, that's an iconic call, and he pulled that off. And that's, and that's what really again spoke to the culture and the quality of the old ESPN. But with the new ESPN, things just weren't the same, and it's frustrating, because I don't think it was an issue of talent. Certainly with Dr. Jerry Punch in the booth, I mean, his calls weren't quite as good, and we had Andy Petrie, and we had Dale Jarrett and Rusty Wallace and these other guys. These are extremely knowledgeable people, just like what they had worked with before, and they were kind of flat-footed, and I really don't think it was their fault. I mean, I think you see them now, and they didn't lose anything in that transition. I think it was more of an issue of a lack of focus by the production staff or the directors or somebody behind the scenes, and that's always that's really what I think was the difference there. I mean, you watch some of those old broadcasts. The music choice that they used for the commercial bumps was off. The graphics were just kind of weird, and the promotions of it, I mean, were just not as good. And they even though I mean they were kind of throwing it all in there. I think perhaps it's a consequence of when Disney took over ESPN and ABC and started picking up other properties, and then started meddling with the formula, and excuse me, things of that nature. I think perhaps that that was what was going on, but it just wasn't the same. And I think we're seeing the final step of that, with ESPN finally distancing themselves because perhaps what was happening back in 2007 was they had the personalities there and everything, but there just wasn't the same drive to really portray the series as best they could, and their focus was diluted at that point, perhaps to other entertainment properties or other sports, or just a differing strategy in ESPN. I know a lot of people have been very critical about all these opinion shows that are on ESPN now. I mean, it's kind of done the same thing that MTV did years ago, where it's so much less about what made it popular to begin with, and it's more of an issue with ESPN itself. Again, I love what Dr. Jerry Punch does, and I still think Brad Daugherty was one of the greatest color commentators that they had in the new ESPN. I would have loved to see him continue doing what he was doing, because he felt to me like he was the closest thing to Benny Parsons we've had since Benny Parsons, doing some of his Buffet Benning sketches and stuff like that. I mean, there were things in there that were working. I just think they needed some other stuff to kind of tweak it, and a little bit more guidance there that just wasn't being provided. And it's unfortunate to have lost that, because we don't, it eventually did just kind of flame out, and you had the current setup now with Fox and NBC, and it's a shame to see, but this is this is it's just kind of the way it's changing right now. I guess we're just seeing the same kind of overhauls that we're seeing in the field itself. When you have your Jeff Gordons, your Dale Juniors retiring, we talked about that a little bit in a previous episode, I believe. But it's unfortunate to see things change that way. But that's unfortunately, that's just, I guess, the way things go. But the concern I have with ESPN and quite honestly, the fact that I really didn't like the later ESPN when it came back in 2007. It also focuses on back to Fox and the fact that they were the ones to really come to the rescue and pick these guys up. And I hope that maybe they can work something out where they can host Jayski and keep that site going, and then they can complete the trifecta with Bob and Ricky Craven. Excuse me. The work that's been done with them, would be good to see that. Would be good to see that still going. But Fox is one that I've been more publicly critical of than ESPN, certainly in recent years. An article I had just last year after the Daytona 500, I was very upset at the way that Fox, I felt, kind of mishandled the broadcast of last year's 500. It was very clear with the start of that race with Alex Bowman on the pole and with all these kids coming in and with top flight rides and clearly seeing Bubba Wallace doing very well through the week, in the duels and building up to the race. The focus of that race should have been on these new drivers and these new stars and these new kids coming up and handling it perhaps in a way that Paul Page and the Indianapolis staff handled IndyCar after the split. And said, well, look, I mean, these may not be guys now, but these are names you're going to recognize in the future. These are names that are coming up. And he may or may not have been right about that, especially after the sport reunited. But you've got to work with what you have. You have to recognize where the sport is and what the storyline needs to be. And, there were so many interesting stories through there. I mean, I couldn't keep track of them all either. I mean, it required some finesse and some focus to direct at some of these teams. I mean, Justin, some of these, just a few of these examples. I mean, Matt DiBenedetto's run at the end of the race, in the 32 car. I mean, it was just like, hey, I mean, he's just coming out of nowhere. Well, hey, he's been working his way up there the whole time. And, some of these other teams come up there. Again, I mentioned Alex Bowman winning the pole. Eric Jones, was in the competition. Then, of course, he won the July race at Daytona later that year. Just understanding that you have to, that a lot of these fans that are longtime fans are going to come into this broadcast and say, hey, look, it doesn't have my guy in the sport anymore. I don't care about this sport. It doesn't have, the manufacturers in it I like anymore. It doesn't have this or that. You can't just say, oh yeah, well, I guess they don't have that. I mean, there were broadcasts I remember going into that week where they would interview somebody like Eric Jones and say, oh, well, people think that you're boring, right? And I'm like, well, that's not helpful. Show us something interesting about him. Actually follow this guy around. Actually talk to him. Actually figure out who he is. I mean, you want people to watch, right? I mean, that's my thought, is that you want them to watch. I mean, you gotta. My point in saying all this is that that should have been the focus of that Fox broadcast, and I don't know why it wasn't. And then of course when the big three kind of took off, then it was really pushed to the background for the rest of the year, and it was just like, oh well. These three guys are going to win all the races, and who cares about everybody else? And it's like, well, I think there are other people that care. Like, and I'm not just saying it from who cares, like who finishes last or anything like that. We're talking about people that are actually getting up there and competing. Again, like Eric Jones when he won in the July race there, or Daniel Suarez almost winning at Pocono, or some of these other races that came up last year. And, maybe one thing moves or one way or the other, and it's like it's suddenly, it could have been a completely different story. I mean, there's always going to be things that surprise you in this sport. I mean, because anything can happen out there, but you should be prepared at least to say, okay, well, when this guy is coming up there, says, well, okay, who's in that car, or who is this guy, or what's this deal about? At least have something to say about it. I'm not saying you have to know it chapter and verse, frontwards and backwards, but you got to. I don't think it's too much to expect professionalism from professionals. To expect that they are going to put in the work to do it the proper way. But that was, again, something that I was very critical of. And I'm not putting this forward and saying that NBC is free of its own criticisms. Oh, I'll get to them too. I mean, but my point in bringing this up is that Fox for all of these mistakes, including that in there, and again, I love Mike Joy's work there. I think he's the guy that he's the lighthouse that everybody needs to be keeping an eye on to keep everybody, in check. I think everything else around him needs to be tightened up just a little bit, and that would help with, with some of these concerns that I have on there, because Mike, more than anything, has an eye for the underdogs in the sport. He always has. He always mentions that. He says, "Oh, what a shame, this guy, was having a good run. He had a new car or anything like that." I remember him doing that all the way back to J.D. McDuffie back in, from some of the research that I did on the project there. He's been very consistent with that, but he can't do it all himself, man. I mean, it's a whole group. You have millions of dollars, and you have all these people out there, and all these cameras and all this. Just use them, But my point bringing this up, I'm tipping the scale way too much here. But my point bringing this up is that for all of the gripes that I know other people have about Fox Sports, the fact that they recognized the value in Ricky Craven and the value in Bob Pockrass and brought them on, that shows me that they are willing to make the adjustments and actually do the right things and get themselves to where they need to be. And that's the most important thing. If they're able to improve the quality of their broadcast and improve the quality of what they bring forward by bringing in people who know what they're talking about, who care about the sport, who aren't just all flash and no dash and all that, they're bringing them all in there, then that's good. That they're at least working on it, and that's good. And perhaps a lot of the things that I'm talking about here, maybe they won't be a problem this year. Maybe they're going to be something better going forward. I think it's they've brought in Jeff Gordon, they've brought in some of these other guys and all that, and it's like, okay, but I'm the Waltrips and kind of, I'm sure they're really cool guys, and I feel hinky about this because, look, I know there's myself and my brother, and way we play off each other, and we get in little rivalries and things like that. I mean, we do our own little fantasy league thing where, we compete against each other. But, would all of America like to listen to us yelling at each other and like, doing all that kind of stuff there? I mean, on a weekly basis, especially over the broadcast while it's happening? I'm not so sure. I mean, I don't know what the solution is. It's unfortunate, but you know what? They made hard decisions before with Larry Mack, and Larry Mack was doing fine to me. At least I didn't think he was part of the problem, but who knows? Who knows? I mean, it's, again, I'm, not to disrespect the Waltrips or anything like that. And, certainly, Daryl's been a huge help. I mean, I know, he helped promote my book on his website, the All Waltrip website and dwstore.com and all that. But, again, I want these guys to be the very best they can be. And I think if we just pretend that everything's okay and just say, oh yeah, that's fine, that's not going to do them any good. If it were me up there, I would expect people to say, oh, well, Brock, you're saying too much, or you're not looking at the camera, or why do you keep swallowing all the time? I don't know. Mouth's watering too much today. I don't know what the deal is, but feel free to post comments on that. Keep me honest. But I expect it myself. Most critical people of my work are people that are usually younger than me. I mean, that's and that's good. I mean, that tells that I think that I'm excited by that. I always say, look, this tells me the future of the sport's in good hands, because there are people that are, if I post a statistic and say, say something that's completely wrong. I think there was one in the grid last year where I said that Kyle Larson won 5 races and he only won 4. And then it's like, okay, well, I'm glad you're jumping on. I'm glad people are holding people to account. I mean, people always say that NASCAR fans complain too much. Heck, I think the problem perhaps is they're not listened to enough. I think that's really more the issue, or just something not enough's done to make that, to turn that around to make people better. So, I'm going way far afield here, but the improvement of the quality of the broadcasts and them bringing in Bob Pockrass and Ricky Craven, they're only going to help. I mean, Craven's very outspoken. He reminds me of Wally Dallenbach, the TNT broadcasts, and who'll just call a spade, and he certainly knows his stuff, and from his own experience in all he's endured, he won 2 of the most thrilling Cup races in recent memory. This is a guy who's been there, done that, and it's great experience. And then Bob Pockris, of course, I've already mentioned him plenty in the first episode here, just all the work he does. They're only going to help Fox. They're only going to help them produce the very best content they can. I'm very excited for what Fox has coming up. And it's unfortunate to see ESPN go by the wayside and really cut ties with the last few things that they had connecting them to the sport. But it could be a blessing in disguise that it's going to help out the Fox broadcast and help things going forward. So we'll see what happens there. But I'm just looking at my notes here to make sure I'm hitting some of the other points that I wanted to talk about this week. The J-Ski thing kind of really front-loaded what I was thinking of talking about, of course. Excuse me. But I was certainly going to be. I was expecting to talk more about the 24 Hours of Daytona also to kind of fill the gap, and then that turned out to be kind of a cluster, what, during the week there. It's unfortunate that it had to end the way it did, but I guess if it's raining too much, I guess these sports cars can't run in the rain or something like that. I mean, okay, they're difficult conditions, but I don't know. I mean, I'm not gonna be the one certainly to come out and be indifferent to driver safety or anything like that. But these are world-class drivers. These are guys that are from all over the place, and it just reminds me of. I mean, I don't know why I'm bringing up more Formula One like I was doing the other day here, but that clip from the Senna movie where Alan Prost is like waving at the crowd saying like, no, stop the race, there's too much rain. It's like, okay, well, just drive slower. I mean, is that not an option? I mean, okay, I get you're in a race and you're trying to go as fast as you can around there, but you have a 13-second lead. You can slow down a little bit, and then the other guys have to slow down too. I mean, if everybody, I mean, just what is it, the universal speed law? I mean, everybody has to obey that on the roads. Why wouldn't it be any different in a race? I mean, okay, it's still gonna be 24 hours. You're literally racing the clock. Maybe they run 500 laps instead of 550, but okay. I mean, I don't know. But I'm popping off here as more of a viewer and a casual outside of it. I don't know if there's something really firm in sports car racing where if it's puddling, if it's ponding, then you don't even go out there and do it. But heck, it's I mean, you can't call in for work when it's raining and it's ponding on the freeway. I'm gonna say, well, no, I'm sorry, I can't come in tonight because it's ponding on the roads. I'm like, well, and they probably they'd say the same thing. They're like, well, just drive slowly, drive more carefully, leave early. Yeah, and that's what you do. That's your job. Just like these guys on the track, this is their job. You just slow down and get through it. Maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but that's what it sounded like to me. So I don't know, but that's about all I have to say. It's exciting for Fernando Alonso. Okay, he's got another one of the Triple Crown that he's working on. The Indy 500 is going to be even more interesting, seeing what he's going to do there. I love the discussions coming up online saying that if he was going to attempt NASCAR, which one would he do? I think the Southern 500 would be a fantastic crown jewel event. I mean, the Daytona 500 does immediately come to mind, but if we're talking about overall challenge and endurance in a similar sense to the Indy 500, I would certainly nominate Darlington. That would be good. I know somebody else already put that forward on Twitter the other day. Beyond that, I mean, I guess we're still slotting in the entry list for Daytona this year. I'm really excited about Cody Ware getting his chance to make his first Daytona 500 start. He's going to be the chartered number 51 for Rick Ware Racing. Good to see. I mean, Talladega last fall was the first Cup race he finished under power, which I know he was really excited about, as was I. That he was that he's taken the next step in his career, and hopefully that'll both help himself as well as his family's team. Hopefully he gets a good run because, again, going back to what I was saying about Fox earlier, the number 51 got a 12th place finish there last year. I believe it was Justin Marks that was driving the car. They did an amazing job. Didn't get any coverage at all. I mean, I know there's 40 cars out there and there's a lot of people to follow, but it's speed weeks. You got several days to cover it. This isn't 1986 or something where you have 65 drivers out there, or trying to qualify for the race. So I don't know. That's a whole other thing. But we're looking, looking ahead to Daytona, and that's really, really doing the final countdown on that. It's, we got the Patriots Bowl waiting us this weekend. That'll be fun, or not. I don't know, but uh, let's let's look forward to an interesting season. I'm going to be very interested to see the entry list when those finally get published, because I don't know how many cars we're actually going to get. I'm hopeful that the duels aren't just a formality like they were last year, where we had 40 cars for 40 spots, and that kind of deal working out there. Hopefully, I mean, I know Bob was saying something about maybe getting 43 cars in there. I mean, we'll see. I mean, it depends on, I guess, on how many teams bring 2 cars, or how many teams even attempt it. You got to get the Beard Motorsports team out there with Brendan Gaughan. I imagine they're probably a shoe-in. Gaughan brothers, who knows what's happening after the Jeffrey Earnhardt thing fell through. But I mean, DJ Kennington, can he get the sponsorship together and attempt it again? I mean, we've seen him do that in the past. There's been other competitors trying to get back into it too, and we'll see what happens. But it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting. And on that note, I want to make sure I mention also, for those of you that are, your patrons, of course, if you're watching this, assuming I haven't made it public later, you've already seen, I've been getting some work done on the Daytona 500 starting grid that I'm going to be doing this year. I'm going to be doing it the next couple of weeks. I have a new format for it this year that is going to be a little bit of a throwback more to the duels grids. I was kind of toying around with some different formats, and I was thinking about using a format like this for a while, with the with kind of a sliding images like going by and things like that. I'd done it with different degrees of success before with the duels, but never for an actual points race. And I'm thinking maybe that would be an interesting way to do it this time around. We'll give it a try and we'll see what happens. But mentioning that on here, of course, for those of you patrons that have signed up since we started on here, again, I'm going to introduce you with your known name and nickname at the end of the video, as part of thanks for for supporting me and supporting this Patreon here going forward. And also, I have since added a goal onto this page here. I was thinking about this since last year, because when I did the Ask Me Anything during the J.D. McDuffie book opening, when that started up, we got a lot of comments on there about the starting grids and saying, well, why don't you do the videos anymore? We want to do more videos. It's like, okay, well, it's two things. It's really, it takes a lot of time, and the new qualifying format doesn't really make it very easy. But I know there's a lot of people that are interested in them, and I know there's a lot of people that are interested in extra stuff that I can provide from the website here. So I created a new goal on there, that if I reach $100 a month for the Patreon level, and then if we can just reach that, then I'll add another starting grid between now and next year's Daytona 500, because my original plan was to just do the Daytona 500 for right now. But I'm doing that regardless. That's already getting set up. But if you want additional grids, I'm gonna just spread the word about the Patreon. Just share it with as many people as you can. Just say, look, this is something we're kind of working towards, because it's still, it would be extremely helpful if that would kind of raise all boats. I can get the video put together, and we can also get more funding for the website and get ready for these races that we're doing later this year. I mean, it's unfortunate we had to scrap Las Vegas and Texas in the spring. I'd really kind of hoped to do that. But, I was kind of reevaluating some things even before starting the Patreon, and thinking, well, the later part of this year, I think it's probably going to be a better way to shoot for it. So we'll start the year with Sears Point, and then Mosport, and then Phoenix and Texas in November. And that's really going to be the plan for our 2019 campaign. But I do have some other things I'm working on. There's one thing I can't tell you about right now that actually I just worked on yesterday. So I'll have some more information on that coming up. But in the meantime, just stay tuned to this Patreon. I have some, for those of you patrons watching this video, I do have some more JD McDuffie content that's going to be coming up here on Friday the 1st, second installment of what was previously posted on here before. I have some really good preseason stuff here that I want to share with you guys. And then I have some more coming up a few weeks after that. So I look forward to that. But look forward to the starting grid video for the Daytona 500 as we get the season started. look forward to additional material that I'm working on here, looking ahead, and additional videos. I'm still pretty happy with doing like a 3 o'clock video here, 3 o'clock Pacific on Wednesdays for these Brock Talks videos. Hopefully they'll be a little bit more organized. Felt it was a little bit scrambled, but just like just like any of these things, some things are going to be better, some things are going to be less so. But I hope you've enjoyed it. I appreciate you for tuning in. And tune in next week, 3 p.m. We'll recover from the Super Bowl and look ahead towards the Busch Clash. And I still like the Busch Clash. I don't care what sponsor it is. Is it the Busch Clash this year? I think it is. Oh, I don't care. I like it. The Busch Clash. That would be good. Just have the big bucket of beers and everybody reaches into it and pulls the starting position out on the can. Let's just do that again. We'll look ahead to that, and we'll start looking towards the beginning of the season. In the meantime, thank you for tuning in. This is Brock Beard signing out, and I will see you next time.